Hello, Norman. Welcome to our second virtual open house as we discuss public transportation and the future of public transportation here in Norman. As many of you know, the University of Oklahoma generously gifted us the public transit system, and our city staff and our council has worked very hard to see a seamless transition from the University of Oklahoma to the city without any interruption of service. But as with all government questions, the big one is, how are we going to pay for it? Unfortunately, we have a 0.25% sales tax that currently goes to the county expiring in March of 2020. And we are asking that you, the voters, support a 1/8% sales tax on November 12th, a week from today, that will help fill the $2.2 million budget shortfall that we have for our $5.3 million system. City Council has increased what we put into it from the general fund. It took a literal act of the governor, but we have $2 million from federal funding coming in, and we're looking forward to improving our system as soon as we get it covered. And the best part is we're going to do it all without raising your sales tax above the current levels. And I want to make it very clear right now that I, as mayor, along with my colleagues, are committing to improving our routes as soon as possible because we want to have the best public transportation system available. It's a vital service for our residents, and great cities provide great public transportation. So with that, let's take your questions.
So, first question is, how does a bus system benefit a city of the size of Norman?
Well, I think I'll start with, we are the third largest city in the state of Oklahoma. While I think that often surprises people who remember a small college town from the 60s and 70s, there are 3 large cities in the state of Oklahoma now. And we're also close to Oklahoma City, and that's a big deal because of regional transit that's coming our way. I think Councilmember Holman, would you like to speak to how interconnectivity of multimodal transportation is crucial for regional transit?
One of the reason I think that public transportation in a city like Norman is important as well is that we have large groups of people in our community that have no other form of transportation. And walking across the entire city of Norman is not something that could be easily done. And not everybody can afford to take an Uber or a Lyft. And there are people that rely on the public transit system to get to work, and to get to school, to get to doctor's appointments, and things like that. And having an adequate and reliable public transit system can help with things in a city like Norman. One specific topic that comes up all the time in Norman is traffic congestion. An adequate, reliable public transportation system can help reduce traffic congestion in a city like Norman, taking cars off the road, and it can also help reduce emissions, which could help a city like Norman get to our goals of RF100 to reduce our carbon footprint in the city of Norman. So that's why it's important in a city like Norman. It's also important, again, for the regional connectivity. We're in a rapidly growing metropolitan area. Oklahoma City, Norman, Edmond, Moore, Midwest City, and Del City have been working for about 15 years now on a metropolitan public transit solution. And Norman already having an established public transit system that people use puts us in a good position to help lead the way along with Oklahoma City in making that regional transit system a reality.
Great. Any other additions to that? Okay. So understanding that having some kind of public transportation system is necessary for a city of Norman's size, or that there are people that rely on it, are there other options besides using a public bus system to get those people moved around?
Well, we had seen the suggestion of contracting with a for-profit company like Uber or Lyft. Unfortunately, if we do something like that, we're going to lose $2 million in federal funding. And then I also have my own concerns. We care a lot about accessibility in Norman. Not all Ubers and Lyft are wheelchair accessible, so there is a large swath of our people who use public transit daily that will no longer have the kind of dependable rides that they do now with CART and Embark, paratransit, all of the public transportation options that we have in our city.
And as the mayor described, contracting with for-profit operations versus the nonprofit operation of public transit, all of the money collected in excess of costs of providing service goes right back into the system to expand routes, expand service, The first discussion council had was the reestablishment of Saturday service here in Norman. And those expansions happen from the cost-effective delivery of that service without a profit motive. So we do think your transportation dollar goes farther in a public transit model.
Any additions
I would
to
only
that?
add to that, the cost is a factor. We can't control the costs of the private sector services, whereas the city council and the city in general can manage the fare structure for a public transit system. For instance, when the transfer took place, the cost of one trip on the fixed routes was 75 cents. I think a typical Uber or Lyft ride is probably going to be $7 or $8, so about 10 times the cost of a typical public transit ride in Norman. So that's another reason that public transportation exists throughout the country. There are 35 different public transportation systems in Oklahoma. We are just one of those 35 providing that much needed service.
So 75 cents is the cost to the rider, but what about the city's cost? If the city's paying $10, $15 per ride per person, why couldn't they just pay for that Uber or Lyft and get the same kind of benefit?
Sure, that's a question we're getting a lot of. A couple comments have been made here. I think a lot of that revolves around the lack of accessibility of the Uber and Lyft or the other private providers, not to mention the cost that they would have involved in that. And a lot of our riders are disabled folks who have mobility devices, large wheelchairs, and that sort of thing, who need access to an accessible vehicle. And that's one of the key principles of our program. We must be fully accessible. We must comply with the ADA. Uber and Lyft are not required to do that.
And Shawn, if I can add to that, when it comes to Uber and Lyft, those drivers drive when they feel like driving. And our riders need reliable, dependable service that scheduled fixed route services do provide. That's something you can depend on. The bus will be there on time and there will be capacity for you. When you rely on Uber and Lyft, there are ebbs and flows in the demand for that particular service. You could wait much longer. There may not be enough drivers willing to work at the time you actually need to get from your starting point to your final destination and back. And we think that reliability and dependability is something you can get with public transit, not necessarily always available from a private perspective, a for-profit operation perspective.
And if,
One other thing I would mention too is that that using individual vehicles like Uber and Lyft or taxi cabs still does not do anything about the issue of traffic congestion in a city like Norman. We spend millions, tens of millions of dollars every to widen streets all throughout the city of Norman to address traffic congestion. And driverless cars, Uber and Lyft, none of those options do anything about the number of cars on the street. So we spend millions of dollars to widen streets and do things like that. And a bus system, again, allows many people to ride in one single vehicle. And I would also highlight the people with disabilities and mobility challenges. There are no Uber and Lyft vehicles in the city of Norman that I'm aware of, and there are no taxi companies in the city of Norman that I'm aware of that have vehicles that can transport people with mobility disabilities.
If I may, I would just expand on what Councilmember Holman is talking about, just from the standpoint of this whole concept of cost per ride and trying to make it profitable flies in the face, in my opinion, of why you would have public transportation as a tax-supported or public good, if you will. It's very similar to the concept of, okay, what is the cost every time somebody's house is on fire or somebody has a stroke or a heart attack and a fire truck responds? We don't charge a per trip fee for that fire truck coming out. That's provided by your taxes. This is proposed to be a tax-supported service. Why do you think the federal government subsidizes public transit all over the country? Because it is providing for that relief on the streets that Councilmember Holman is talking about. It is providing for those services that are needed by people that can't drive for whatever reason, don't have a car because they can't afford it. It is a public good that should be supported by taxes, and that's why it's proposed that way.
So there's this talk, I hear you guys talking about relieving the road and the congestion, but there's also this perception out there, true or false, that the buses are empty and that there's not a lot of people using these buses. How many people are actually using these buses, and how many people are we getting off the roads by having this transit system currently?
Yeah, so this past year, again, we have yet to have a full year under our belt in terms of operating the system, so we're relying on the numbers from last year when the university ran the system. We provided over 300,000 fixed route rides and over 32,000 paratransit rides outside of the student counts. There with the students, there were over 1 million rides last year in the system. So think about that, the number of folks throughout the, as City Manager Pyle said, it's all day, every day that we're running these buses. And yes, there are times when there are fewer people on the buses than other times, just like there are times when there are fewer cars on the road than other times. But collectively, we are providing a much needed service, and they have to run throughout the day. So there are going to be ebbs and flows of ridership, which is partially what people see on some of these buses throughout the day.
I would add in that I mentioned earlier about readjusting our routes. We are well aware that the system we inherited benefited the University of Oklahoma. They were the main, again, people who ran the system, and it was designed for students. I'm ready to design a system for residents. Where do you need to go in Norman? And as we have better routes that go south of Highway 9, that go to more Norman Technology Center, that go to the East Library, that go to Westwood in the summer, so you have better access to facilities that your tax dollars built, I think we're going to see ridership go up. I really do.
I would also note too that I think if there's just 10 people on a bus, you look in a bus and there's 10 people riding it, that's 10 potential cars that are not on the street right now in Norman. And you think about Lindsay Street on any given weekday, going through campus, how congested it is. Think of 10 less cars being in that line of cars in front of you at the stoplight. It's significant. And as mentioned, thousands, hundreds of thousands of rides per year use that system. That's hundreds of thousands of car trips that are not being taken, not being put on our streets, causing congestion and wear and tear on the streets. So those are just a few of the things that I would know.
Mayor Clark, you've mentioned a couple times now that you and council would like to create a better system. Looking at the funding that this tax would provide and the revenue that we have, the cost that we have, that doesn't leave a lot of room. How do you plan to expand those services or create better services with the funding available?
That's a very important question. We know that our system is about $5.3 million, and when the sales tax votes, talking to you voters, November 12th, when it passes, we're only going to have about a $300,000 cushion. I've been talking to staff again since day one about when do we bring back Saturday service, and that alone will take up $150,000 to $200,000 of it. So I don't think the city council is under any sort of illusion that we're done with $1.1 million. I think we know that we're going to have to continue to invest in this system, especially if we want it to improve. I want to warn people that you're not going to see changes in routes overnight because we want to do it right. We want to get community input, we want to take our time, and we have to have 2 different public hearings by federal standards to adjust those routes, but we are committed to doing that. We want it to be a system that benefits people, gets them where they need to go, and something we can all be proud of. So we are prepared to put more money into it, but we know at the bare minimum, to maintain what we have right now, we need that 1/8% sales tax to help fill that budget shortfall.
Do you guys plan to look at any of the current routes and where the stops are and make any adjustments, or are we going to maintain the system like it is and just add on to that?
We're actually looking at that right now, for example, with the new Central Library. You may have noticed it moved. It's officially open north of Andrews Park, but the stop is still next to the old library, right next to it, further down the street. So we can do little tweaks like that, but it's not just about moving a sign or moving a stop. A lot more goes into that, and change is hard. We had a great forum last night, and people mentioned how they've gotten used to things a certain way, both the fees and the routes, and it does take time, so we don't want to rush it for that reason either.
The things that I would mention is, along those same lines, is there's currently a bus stop at Reeves Park. We're going to build the new senior center at Reeves Park, but the bus stop that is at Reeves Park is on the complete opposite side of the park. So we're going to need to adjust that to bring that stop down a little bit so that it's right in front of the senior center. I think now that the city has taken over this system, we can start looking at making the system more efficient, where we might be able to save some money and reinvest it back into making the system better. There is an existing master plan for the transit system in Norman that goes back to 2008 that looks at how the system should be operated in a city this size to be more efficient. It suggests that the system be converted to a grid pattern, which is what most bigger cities have. And our current system is a circulator system. Some routes can take an hour to go around the whole thing. And so a grid system would make the system much more dependable and reliable, and could even see some cost savings, I would think. But that is a plan that exists. It needs to be updated. It's 11 years old. We now have regional transit discussions that are going on, and so we need to look at updating that. But our goal as the council, in my perspective, over the last year or so since we first found out that we were going to have to take this system over, was, okay, we need to stabilize and maintain what we have for the people that rely on what we have right now. So get this transition over to the city, and then stabilize and maintain what we have, and then start talking about how can we improve this system, how can we make it better. But right now we've really had to get to a point where we can take over the system and stabilize it and make sure that it continues operating as it is for those that need it right now.
Exactly.
Okay, and so I hear you talking about some efficiencies that can be made in cost savings. Are some of those cost savings doing something like the Norman Transcript Editorial Board suggested, looking at shorter buses, or maybe a van service for the fixed routes? Is that possible, to do a van service or something of that nature?
Yeah, so the question about smaller buses has come up a lot, and our current fleet actually has a mixture of 30-foot and 35-foot fixed route buses. While it makes sense somewhat to have smaller vehicles for the slight fuel efficiency gains and able to get around the city streets easier, sometimes you lose the mobility inside the bus for those wheelchair or mobility devices to get around. While they're still ADA accessible, it's just a little tighter as mobility devices get bigger and bigger. And potentially to fit everything you need in these buses, you could potentially lose a wheelchair position and go down from, say, 4 or 3 to 3 or 2, depending on the configuration of the vehicle. And so that's one reason why you have to have a mixture of sizes and types of vehicles on your routes. And as far as going to a van service, we do operate some minivans in our paratransit fleet, but for fixed route, you really need a sizable vehicle to move many people around. Like Councilmember Holman was saying, to get those 10 or 15 cars off the road, you need a bus or a vehicle that can handle those and handle those accessible mobility devices as well. I would only add to that again, the city has only operated this bus system for about 3 months, and so we're still learning every day, and I think we'll spend the rest of this fiscal year learning a lot about what it does cost and where the efficiencies might be found. It's really not a lot different than any other city service, whether it's street maintenance or park maintenance or whatever other else we do in the city. Each of us as staff teams are trying to find efficiencies to work within our budgets, but to make them better at the same time. That's exactly what we plan to do with the bus system. For instance, fuel consumption. You can imagine that these buses are not very efficient, like any large vehicle. About half of the current fleet are compressed natural gas vehicles. We'd like to convert the rest of those to compressed natural gas, or maybe now electric buses. Those are starting to make their way onto the market. So just saving the cost of conventional fuels can save significant amounts of money in an operation of a transportation system like this. We signed a contract with Embark to provide all of the labor and resources. We may find ourselves in a year or two thinking that perhaps we can do that more in-house, or part of it in-house, and at a cheaper cost. So there are a number of ways I think we can save money and provide more services. We just need a little bit of time to learn our way through the process.
And with that, so we have a $3.1 million contract with Embark. Were they our best option, or are we really getting the best service with Embark?
That's a great question. We're getting that a lot. I think they were our best option. They were probably our only option, frankly, at the time that this took place, because if the city had chosen a public provider like Embark, we could avoid going through an RFP process for private companies that provide transit services. For instance, McDonald Transit is the company that the city of Edmond uses, but they are a private for-profit company, and it would have cost us a lot of time and probably money to seek out all of the private providers. By going to a public trust like Embark, we were able to do that literally in a matter of days and begin negotiations and secure the contracts that we needed in time for the transfer in June and July. I would also say that Embark is probably the best and most skilled provider of transit services in the state of Oklahoma. So we could not have found a better provider. They have been providing this service in Oklahoma City for many, many years. They're really good at it. They are transit professionals. When we bought the service, we bought the drivers, the dispatchers, the supervisors, the ADA coordinators, the marketing people, the route designers. We bought many, many services when we signed a contract with Embark, and frankly, we could never have gotten up to speed that quickly as a city staff team in order to provide the service by July 1st. But as I said, over the course of the next few years, we may find that there are other options, either public or private, or to pull the program in-house and hire our own staff and experts to run the system.
I would add to that, though, Embark also obviously runs Oklahoma City's buses, and at a time where we're gearing up as a state for mass transit and regional transit, it's perfect timing for us to connect with Embark, because it again further builds into that regional transit system. As Councilmember Holman mentioned, the first step of regional transit isn't the commuter rail, it's the bus system that gets people to the commuter rail once that is in place. So I think that they're a great company, they're public, they've got experience, but the fact that they help connect us with regional transit and get us ahead of other cities in that group to make the most success of that program when it comes online is huge.
So with Embark being Oklahoma City's provider and us looking in the future to make a regional transit authority and connect with Oklahoma City, could the city not have just paid Oklahoma City directly to be a part of their transit system and they take over our bus system?
Great question. Again, that was part of our negotiations. I think our city attorney can speak to that as well. But the concern from them and frankly from the city of Norman was commingling of public dollars within two cities. We've been very, very careful not to commingle those dollars or those services. I can tell you that Embark and our accounting, our finance department are very careful not to mix those dollars up, because the dollars raised and spent in Oklahoma City must go to the Oklahoma City services. The dollars raised and spent in Norman must go to the Norman services, and that therein lies the contract that we were able to negotiate, where they are providing that service to us with the same program. But yes, they are a public trust, and we have to maintain that I think that practice of separating the use of the dollars.
As Mr. O'Leary was mentioning, the separation of those two systems as opposed to a complete merger, the beauty of the system as it is designed in the current contract allows Norman's local elected officials to make the decisions on changing the route. And had we just signed over the system to the city of Oklahoma City, we would be at the mercy of what their elected officials thought was the most efficient route for the Norman residents. Right now, you have the ability to bump into your elected officials at the grocery store, at the gas station, at church, at a city council meeting, and say, I need a bus stop closer to my house. And that's a challenge we can undertake and homework we can do to help improve the system. And your voice gets lost in the mass of voices if we were just part of the Oklahoma City system.
And just from a practical funding standpoint, the FTA recognizes Norman as a small urbanized area in it of its own self, separate from the Oklahoma City urbanized area. So there is specific funding that is allocated to Norman for Norman services And that's one reason why even partnering with the University of Oklahoma as a community partner makes sense, because they are in our community, and we can see those people, we can touch them if that makes sense. And having our own elected officials in charge of it makes a lot of sense for a funding standpoint as well.
Great. And looking at, I keep hearing a lot about this regional transit authority and being a regional partner. Can you talk a little bit more about why that's important and what is the regional transit authority for people that might not know?
I can take that one. I've been, in my time on council, and even before I was on city council, the regional transit has been something I've been very interested in personally. And I have served as a representative to ACOG for the city and been to many meetings over the last several years about this regional transit authority. As I mentioned before, the cities of Norman, Moore, Oklahoma City, Edmond, Midwest City, and Del City have been working since about 2004 on a regional transit, public transit solution that includes a metropolitan bus system and a regional rail system. There are several areas of the metro area that are not served by public transit at all. For example, Moore is sandwiched in between Norman and OKC. We both have transit systems, but they don't. So the residents of Moore don't have an option. The residents of Midwest City and Del City do not either. So the goal is to, with a growing metro area like this, Oklahoma City is the 27th largest city in the United States and growing. And we're a spread out metropolitan area. And the idea that we can connect Norman to Edmond and Tinker Air Force Base, with downtown Oklahoma City being the central hub of that, has been a goal of all the cities. And over the years that I've been on council, we have approved funding along with the other cities that have been involved to create the Regional Transit Authority. The governing board of that authority was created about 6 months ago. There are 7 members on that board. Norman has 1. All the cities have 1 representative except Oklahoma City. They have 2, and that's primarily because they are significantly larger than all the other cities involved. One of their representatives, though, is former Governor Brad Henry. So there are people, and then Norman's representative is Marion Hutchison. He's someone that I've, in discussions with him, knows more about public transit than just about anybody else I've ever talked to. So it's a really good a board that's going to be governing that, and in a few years they'll be asking the whole Oklahoma City metro area to approve some kind of funding solution, which we have addressed in the language of what we're asking for as well. So the goal has always been to prepare for a metropolitan transit system that serves all of Oklahoma City area residents, including Norman residents. And so that's kind of where we're at, and a little bit of the history on that.
I would clarify too, by envisioning the bus system for everyone, and you referenced how our ordinance is written, our 1/8% sales tax will expire when that sales tax plan comes online, so long as it provides for a bus system. We're never going to get caught unprepared. As we've proven, we will always provide a bus system for our residents, but ours will go away, so it's not a permanent tax. And when all of the cities will have that sales tax increase, we'll actually feel it less here in Norman, Oklahoma, because we were already investing in public transit.
And I just mentioned too, to clarify the sales tax portion, state law in Oklahoma mandates or restricts that the regional transit be funded by sales tax only. And so until that changes by state law, that's what it'll be. But we have included in our language to be flexible that it doesn't have to be sales tax. Should the state law change, our sales tax would expire upon any funding mechanism that is approved by Oklahoma City area voters.
And that actually brings me to my last set of questions here is, we've mentioned that, Mayor Clark, in your opening comments, you mentioned that this vote wouldn't raise sales tax levels. Can you talk a little bit about how that's possible and how much or what voters, should this pass, would be seeing the cost be to them at the register?
Sure. So right now our sales tax is 8.75%, which is not the highest in the state. We're quite average with that, actually. and 0.25% of that will expire in March 2020. We are asking for a piece of that will start after that one expires, but they won't overlap. So you'll never see a sales tax rate above 8.75%. So if you go to the store and spend $100 and it'll still be $108.75. It won't ever be any more than that. So it's such a unique opportunity to continue to invest in your community without seeing your sales tax raise above the current rates. Is it a new sales tax? Yes, it's a new opportunity to invest in your community and provide for public transit, but it will not raise sales tax levels above its current level.
Yeah, it would just expand upon that. It is a existing sales tax that went to pay for the county jail. It is set to expire, and we are asking to renew 1/8% of that. I think that is 12.5 cents per $100 spent in the city of Norman. So for 12.5 cents for every $100, we can continue providing the transit system that the people of Norman rely on every day.
Well, that wraps up all the questions that I have, and haven't received any public questions. So I'll go ahead and move on to closing statements. If anybody has anything that they feel hasn't been covered or you'd like to mention while we're here.
Yeah, I'd like to say I've been involved in Norman public transit for about 5 years now, and what an exciting time to be involved in transit. Just the conversations we're having about improving the service and making it better, I haven't been a part of since I started my career with transit. So I hope that these conversations will continue past November 12th and that we can improve upon the bus system like Councilmember and Meyer have mentioned, and keep highlighting the needs and importance of what we have in Norman and helping this transit system become better.
I would just add to that, just this last legislative session in Oklahoma, the Office of Mobility and Transit was added to the state government structure, actually within the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, and we've been Taylor and I recently attending some startup meetings and organizational meetings, but the purpose of that and the reason that our local representatives supported that bill was to improve mobility, which really revolves around transit services, but all forms of mobility. So Uber and Lyft is certainly a form of mobility and transportation, but the focus is to public transportation. And I think it just illustrates the identification of that priority in our state, in our region, particularly in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. But there are 35 transit agencies throughout the state of Oklahoma. There is one in southeast Oklahoma I learned about recently that has 200 buses in their system. We have 28, and they cover 11 counties. So there's all kinds of needs for better transit and public transportation services. Norman is just experiencing the same thing that the rest of the state and the country is experiencing, and we've got to do better. I think that's the general message. And the state is going to help us do that by organizing us as transit professionals, hopefully raising more state contributions to the programs and helping us to be more efficient and to provide better services. So this is not just a Norman thing. Norman is, I think, on the fringe of the same issues that the rest of the cities and the counties throughout this state are experiencing.
And I would just kind of hammer home that voting no means that your taxes would go down by 1/8%. You'll save 12 cents for every $100 you spend, and people that rely every day on that transit system will be negatively impacted. If you vote yes, your taxes will stay exactly the same as they are today. They will not go up, and we will continue to provide the service that the people rely on. I have been using the public transit system in Norman since I was in middle school. I used to ride the East Lindsay Street route. I was the second stop, so I had to ride it all the way around back to campus and then transfer to the Main Street route and ride that to Norman High. Afterwards, after school, I'd have to ride the Main Street bus all the way to the west side of town to the mall, and then all the way back to campus, and then wait for the Lindsay Street bus to come and pick me up. So you can imagine what that was like in the wintertime, especially. I know what it's like to have to rely on it. I know that it is not the most reliable system in the entire world, but we know what we can do to make it better. And now that the city is in control of this, which again I think is really an opportunity, as difficult as it has been to transition this system from OU to the city of Norman, I've really looked at it as an opportunity and a way for us to have more direct control over that system so that we can better serve the residents of Norman that are not affiliated with the university campus. So I think this is a good thing in the long term for the city of Norman. I'm going to be voting for this. I'm encouraging everybody to vote for this. Transportation and public transit has been a top priority of mine in every campaign that I've run since the first time I ran for city council, and it always will be as long as I'm sitting up here. So thank you all for participating in this, and please vote yes next Tuesday.
Thank you, Councilmember. I love hearing his story about riding the bus. So I will point out why sales tax. It's the most regressive tax out there. We're aware of that. I loathe funding things with sales tax. But did you know that Oklahoma is the only state in the nation that requires cities to fund themselves from sales tax only? We're the only ones that do it this way. I can rest assured that all of the other mayors would prefer to do it differently, but that's not the system that we have. So I share your concerns, and we have such a unique opportunity, again, to fund a vital public service without raising sales tax above the current levels. It's an amazing opportunity to continue to invest in your community, and not just in your community, but in your neighbors. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about the economy and jobs. We're talking about educational opportunities. We're talking about quality of life. And we could do it all without raising sales tax above the current levels. So I will join Councilmember Holman in his strong support of a yes vote on November 12th.
Just one more thought. You hear the passion and the compassion that your local elected officials have for providing good, high quality, reliable public transit service. And you can keep that passion and compassion here locally with your actions to ensure adequate funding. If you want a voice in how public transportation is handled and how it grows in the future, that local control is mission critical. You want to be able to have access to your local elected officials who will control the growth of the system, add new routes, and improve the service. I think you've seen it right here with your local elected officials this afternoon. Thank you.
I would just, as your city chief financial officer, just take a step back and reiterate the statement that the mayor made about that $2.2 million budget gap annually that will exist if this public transit sales tax does not pass. When the University of Oklahoma passed on the administration of public transportation in Norman to the city council members immediately made it clear that they had this as a very high priority, and they wanted to maintain public transit and to pay for it out of the city's general fund. Well, the city's general fund is already stressed to provide for the services that we're already trying to provide: street maintenance, park maintenance, police services, fire services. So if this were not to pass, what I have been saying to council is that some difficult choices will have to be made. In other words, something will have to give, something will have to go. Whether it is some of the public transit services or some of the park maintenance services or some of the police services, something will have to go. And those decisions will have to be made. And so that, from your CFO's perspective, is why I would urge a positive consideration and a positive vote. Now, I'm going to tell my bus story. Many of you know I live in Oklahoma City. I live in Northeast Oklahoma City. I'm going to talk about my daily commute today. Ride bus number 3, I leave my house 6:15 in the morning, get to the bus stop. I ride the number 3 bus to the transit center downtown. I get on the number 24 Sooner Express, which goes from downtown Oklahoma City to Norman. But I'm lazy, so the number 3 bus I didn't take all the way to the transit center. I got off the number 3 bus and got onto the streetcar, which takes me within a block of the Amtrak station downtown Oklahoma City. So I ride the Heartland Flyer, which I get off at the Norman Depot, which is 2 blocks from my office. So I am that multimodal guy. I'm doing it now. And I very much appreciate that the service is there for folks that either don't have a choice or folks like me are just cheap and want to provide the cheapest and most efficient service for ourselves. I want to keep that service available for myself in this regional area that we are in. Norman is the home of the University of Oklahoma. We are the education hub for the Oklahoma City metropolitan area. And we want to make it easy for folks to come to the University of Oklahoma for their educational needs. Let's keep the system as it is.
Great. Well, thank you all for participating in the panel today, and thank you for your time.